Okay, so welcome to this episode. In today's episode, I'll just be showing you how to do simple blemish removal and frequency separation for image retouching in Affinity Studios. A couple of things I've noticed with Affinity is it has a very different approach to doing frequency separation. So if you're coming from a software like Photoshop, you're most likely going to have to know how to do the steps by itself. But somehow Affinity has been able to automate the entire process. So it's just one click and then you have your frequency separation layer. So that's actually very interesting. But we'll get into that in the course of the video. Affinity has a studio that it calls photo retouching, but after I explored it more, like in the subsequent part of this video, you realize that there's no need to actually use the photo retouching studio that you have inside of Affinity. You can get everything you want to get done with the Pixel Studio. In my opinion, there's nothing too special about this photo retouching studio. It's practically the same thing. In fact, there's nothing that makes this different from the Pixel Studio that is an advantage. So just like any photo retouching, first of all, what we start with doing is removing the blemishes in the image. There is a standard healing brush tool inside of Affinity and it works like every other or like Photoshop does. Use Alt to select the source and then copy that. But Photoshop has another tool that does the healing, but you don't have to use Alt. One is the spot healing brush, one is the healing brush. So I was trying to look for the same thing. That's why I opened up this particular tab and I was scrolling, but I later realized that it was down in that section. What I was looking for was already there. So yeah, once you select the standard blemish removal tool, it just works like any other one. Just click on all the blemishes in the image and it's just going to make a good enough replacement of it. When you're making a blemish removal, first thing that you do is make a duplicate of the layer, and then with the blemish removal tool, you just click on every single blemish on the face and it would make a correction of that. So it's going to make some calculations and erase those blemishes on the skin. Once you're good with it, you can just preview it like what you did and what was there before to make sure that, okay, you've done a good enough job. I'm going to be showing you the frequency separation part with a different image because to me this picture looks good enough in terms of the blending of the skin tones on this image. So we'll do that with a different image so that you can see the differences much clearer. This had more blemishes that we could remove, and then the next image will allow us to show off the frequency separation tool. So like when you bring in your image, like I said previously, you actually do not need to use the photo retouching studio. There's really not so much difference. You can do everything here in Pixel. So what you do is you come up to Pixel and then you go to filter and choose frequency separation. Yeah, so here you can just decide on how much blur you want in the image. So how frequency separation works, just in case this is your first time doing frequency separation, like you have no knowledge about it even from a different software, is we're going to separate the image, like the name implies, into two halves. So one half is what we usually call the low, and you see that Affinity names it as that, and the high. So the low usually deals with the blending of the colors, right? How the colors interact with itself, and then the high deals with the textures. So if you do this correctly, by the time you layer those two images on top of each other with a few effects, you should get exactly the same image you had before. So what I did here now was to turn off the high, that's turn off the texture, so I could just see the colors on its own, right? And then make the adjustments I wanted to make. Now, Affinity also has a wet brush tool that you can use. So click and hold on the brush tool and you see the wet brush directly under it. Now you just have to make a couple of adjustments like any other software. First of all, if you're coming from Photoshop, you'll notice that there is no like clean brush after each stroke or something like that. So what you're going to have to do is come to this side over here and reduce the opacity. So you don't want the color, you just want the brush to blend, like you want to use it as a smudge tool, and then you just reduce the strength to something very low, something around like 18 or less than that, sometimes maybe 10, between 1 to 10. You don't want it to be too strong, you don't want it to be too artificial, but then you want it to be prominent enough. Then what you're going to do here is to just look at each section of the color and blend the transitions in the places where the colors in the face of that individual shifts. You are going to ensure that you blend them in such a way that the transition is not too sharp anymore. It's just a very smooth and gentle gradient. So you can do this on the entirety of the image. Sometimes we would also make a selection and then use a Gaussian blur to also emphasize those corrections that we're making to the face. But in this particular one, I didn't really use that because I felt the wet brush did a good enough job. So this is a preview of the before and after. You can see a noticeable difference in how the colors are blended together. So what I did was I put them together in a group because of the next step. So what I want to do now is to just do some color adjustments to it, and then that would be good enough. So I'm just showing you both a little bit of color grading and how you can do that also in Affinity. So here I just noticed that there were a couple of mistakes or I felt like we could also blend the lips too as well, and then we made that correction. Now, you can also, Affinity also allows you to create gradient maps just like Photoshop and all. It's slightly different, right, in its execution, but it's practically the same thing. What I was doing here was to create a good enough gradient that would give us like a golden colored skin tone. So just like you come down to the filter section, open up the gradient map section and select the colors that you want. Now, one of the few things I noticed that was a lot different from coming from software like Photoshop is you can't move the nodes at the edges, at the extreme edges of your gradient map. So in Photoshop, you can actually move it to kind of intensify the gradient, but you can't do that right now in Affinity. And also, you cannot create a mask inside of a group, and it's very, very weird. So you can't put a mask on top of an adjustment layer in Affinity. You're going to have to keep the group of the frequency separation together, and then on top of it, you can then create a gradient map and attach a mask to it. So what I thought I would do was to clip the gradient map to the group and then add a clipping mask, but Affinity apparently doesn't allow that. That's why you see I'm kind of struggling going back and forth to get it to work here. But I've realized, okay, you can work around it by just keeping the gradient map outside of the group, so as not clipping it to the group, and then just adding a simple mask to it. So now what we're just doing is using a very soft brush to paint in that skin tone. So I don't want it to be on everything. It's not like I'm giving the entire thing a different color grade. Now I just want this to be the skin tone that I'm affecting. So you select a soft round brush and then you can make that paint. So now inside of the clipping mask, also just in case this is your first time doing this, black hides, white reveals, right? So if you look in this section, you see black and white. So if the brush is on white, anytime you paint inside the clipping mask, it's going to make that layer reveal itself. But if you paint black, it's going to hide it. So initially the adjustment layer was affecting everything, but we want to just limit it to her face and her skin. So that's how we're going to do it. I noticed a couple of things too while working on this, because at a particular point Affinity just stopped using shortcuts. So you will notice me going up to edits to do undos and all of that. Really do not know why it did that. I think this is the first time I'm encountering this problem. So just in case you know why or how to fix that, you can just let us know or let me know in the comment. So just make a simple painting over the face to give it that color. Always ensure that you change it to a soft light or an opacity depending on the intensity, and then reduce the opacity of the gradient map so that you can get a natural looking color. Now also notice that the hair too, I wanted to make an adjustment to make it look more vibrant. Same thing again, gradient map, but this time around we're doing a very dark. Here I did like a black brown to something light, but then I eventually changed it to just black to a light brown, right? And then same process as well. Don't clip it to the group. Create a clipping mask. Create a mask and then convert it to soft light and reduce the opacity. So right here, I noticed that it wasn't prominent enough. So I just went back in and changed one of the nodes to just a complete back. So it gave us a more prominent color for what we're looking for. So that brings us to the end of this particular episode. Photo retouching is actually much easier, right? Now you don't really have to learn how to do the apply image, subtract and all of that if you're coming from Photoshop. It's just one click, and then yours is to just adjust how much of the radius you want. Now Photoshop also has this feature, you can get plugins or actions that can do that for you, but it's super impressive that you just have it at the tip of your fingers and you can do it. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next episode. If you are not subscribed, please ensure that you do that. Thank you.